Hello and welcome back. I'm Tim Curtis and I'll be with you for the remainder of the afternoon for Tech and AI Live New York. As you can probably tell, I don't have a New York accent, but forgive me for that. Our next panel now is bringing together some thought leaders discussing the tech which helps deliver sustainability and business advantage to boot. So let's please welcome Bruno Sarda, who is with EY, America's Climate Change and Sustainability Services Leader. Neema Uthappa. Neema, have I pronounced your last name correctly?
That's right, Ella.
Thank you, Neema. Chief Information Officer at the Management Consultants, Oliver Wyman. Jason Frame, welcome Jason, Chief Information Officer at Southern Nevada Health District. And Anthony Dasari, VP Kyndryl Skytap Integration at Kyndryl. So welcome all, and thank you for joining us here on the Sustainable Technology Forum. But I'm very well aware when discussing this subject,
for some reason I can't hear you.
Technology
Can you guys hear me?
Means different things to different people, depending on whether you're actuating it within your business or providing that service or advice to businesses. So can we kick off and perhaps Bruno first and go round what sustainable technology means to you, either in your businesses or the services you provide?
Sure. Well, hi, Tim. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having us. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, as both a large company, right? Almost 500,000 people, offices around the world, very tech intensive. So we deploy a lot of sustainable tech within our own operations. But also, as an advisor to many of the world's large organizations, of course, we think of sustainable tech, both in terms of how do we help our clients achieve that. So, but, in terms of what does it mean to us, it means basically, I think, two things. One is technology that operates sustainably. So you can think of whether it's a low emission vehicle, it's a high efficiency server or HVAC system. And then there's technology that enables something else to run more sustainably, right? And I think so we see obviously a lot of that in the information system space, as well as a lot of the enabling tech, even things like solar panels, themselves help energy systems run more carbon effectively, for example.
Neema.
For me, I think sustainable tech also, and thank you for inviting. Like Bruno said, as efficiency, it's basically, for me, it is creating that environmental efficiency. The impact on the environment is what is a primary consideration for sustainable tech. Earlier, we were talking about ESG. Now, from what I understand, ESGT is the new buzzword, right? And the technology has gotten added, which is a good thing. It's a welcome change. And I think we all have a part to play in the future, in what we do for our children, for the future generation. So for me, it is about creating that environmental impact through even small actions.
Thank you. Anthony, your perspective? Have we lost Anthony?
I think he was having some audio issues and he's trying to restart, I think.
Jason, thank you. There you go, studio. He's having some technical problems. Jason, let's move to you. Your perspective on sustainable technology within your organization.
Yeah, really, it's very similar to what Bruno and Neema said. It's not just being sustainable for sustainable sake, but really thinking about the future and what that's going to bring to us. And we're seeing a big change with AI, and you're hearing a lot about sustainability with AI and the energy consumption. I think that's the new part of the conversation that we're having, is how we can be, more energy efficient when it comes to AI.
Well, so that's very much an issue which we have to touch upon, and so let me jump to that straight away, because we all know that the data centers are consuming power and using water in vast quantities as part of cooling and there is something of a dichotomy here, isn't there? And I wonder how you all square that, because our increasing use of tech and AI means actually that we are not in the slightest bit sustainable. Is that a fair hypothesis? Bruno, may I put that to you first?
I think that for sure it's a hypothesis that's getting a lot of airtime, and for sure, the way AI has kind of come onto the stage, it's consuming a very large quantity of power, and because of that, I think there's an assumption. Therefore, it's unsustainable. I think for sure, we need to make sure that if you will, the efficiency of how those models consume energy continue to improve, and I think they will exponentially. I think we also need to make sure that the electrons that power all that infrastructure keep getting, cleaner, and I think that's likely to happen as well. But that dichotomy, for sure, as we build tech infrastructure, tech environments, tech solutions, tech devices, they for sure have a footprint, right? They require materials, they require energy to power them, networks to connect them. They, at some point at their end of life, create some kind of waste stream. And of course, you balance that with all of what that tech enables, right? And there's, a myriad of examples where by elevating, increasing the tech footprint, you're actually potentially dematerializing or decarbonizing an entire separate footprint. You look at things like telehealth, for example. You could, you increase the health footprint of the digital health, but you're displacing, millions of pounds of X-ray film and storage boxes and shipments of, records from one office to the other. That's just one example. So I think keeping those two things in mind, because they're both very real, we need to make sure that we address the the footprint, including the energy footprint of new tech and AI for sure, but also to not let that overshadow the fact that it creates I think an overwhelmingly net positive impact on the way we can run our businesses and society in general.
Yeah, Anthony, welcome back. Great to have you back. We moved on because Jason sort of primed us to move straight on to talking about data centers and the consumption of energy there. And Jason, I must talk to you about that in terms of the health world. But Anthony, let's bring you in. The obvious hypothesis is that we are turning more and more to tech and AI, which is wonderful and solving so many problems for business. But of course, consuming vast amounts of energy and is anything but sustainable. Your perspective, your thoughts.
I was listening to Bruno. Thank you for having me on the panel, first of all. And I know we always have some tech problems, but I'm glad we're over it.
But it's a tech show, isn't it? I mean,
yes, exactly. So thank you. That's a great question to start off with, right? So I think as we consume more tech from an AI perspective, there is a continuum of a confluence of technologies that has to mature right from the chip level all the way to the app, right, that is delivering the service. And it starts off with efficiency across all of this. And if you look at what can really galvanize this is focusing on energy consumption right at the chip level. So there's various things that are coming across from a roadmap perspective. There's some crazy ideas, and some I think have been implemented already. So how do we take away that data center footprint from the Earth to launching a data center in space, right? To actually, so those kinds of technologies are coming, some are nascent. So I think as we drive the energy efficiency, and when ESG, and mostly ESG is not becoming a checkbox, it is now an integral part of IT and business strategy, because it does deliver a differentiation. Because when you're looking at one of the most important business outcomes, which is sustainable revenue with the right margin, that actually drives some cost efficiencies, which directly are a derivative of energy efficiencies. So companies that are focused that way will deliver differentiation. It is not a checkbox anymore. It is a capability that differentiates, that is an integral part and the DNA of an IT and a business strategy.
Actually, thank you for raising that, because I want to explore that absolute point in just 1 second. But just because I'm trying to be very polite, let's just run around. Neema, maybe your perspective on this dichotomy of data centers and the power they use, and yet we want more and more tech.
So what I heard or read is like 40% of the water we use for data centers pretty much gets evaporated. Now I don't know if there's an actual study, but that's what is the hypothesis there, right? Like, so I think we should think of using the water itself, like more recycling the water that we use for data centers. That's one. And also considering the location. It starts with planning these data centers, even not because we just, I'm not saying they don't plan, but can we use solar energy, for example? Can we have this placed in those energy efficient areas? Like, I used to work for energy company at some point, and we were talking about microgrids and specialized grids and smart grids at that point. And can we use some of the utility industry technologies to actually plan for the infrastructure even than just being location based? And then we also talk about this carbon capture and utilization, carbon capture and storage these days. So how can that add to the mix? So literally, I think it starts with planning. As IT professionals, we don't get into planning for the overall infrastructure or the community infrastructure or city planning even, right? So for me, it's broader than just looking at data center for an IT company. I think that's where the integration between community and city and the companies come together, not just as silos and individuals.
Thank you. Well, Jason, that must chime with you. And as you kicked us off on this subject, you must have the last word on it. I think your mic's off, Jason.
Okay, I think that's better. Sorry about that.
We got you.
With us, as we're talking about data centers, and one of the things that we're working on is getting off of our on-premise data center into a more greener, friendly cloud data center.
Okay.
Being in healthcare, that's always a tough road to do because of the protected information that we have. And so we're looking at how we can do that. So we're using more of a hybrid option. We're trying to get more of the high intensive compute aspect done on the cloud, where our data storage and the lower intensity stuff can still remain on-prem and keep that security. That's one of the things we've been looking at. And then when it comes to AI, fortunately, we're not doing a lot right now, but that's part of our ethical AI policy that we're in development in, is increasing sustainability as a practice when it comes to AI. And one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough, but I think really needs to, is teaching people to write better prompts so they can get to their answer faster without using as much compute. And so we've actually spent a lot of time educating our staff on how to become better prompt engineers so they can get to their answers faster and not have to do multiple queries to get there.
Yeah, surely. I've worked a lot in healthcare in the UK, and I've seen how the sustainability agenda certainly drives cost savings, which, as far as I can see, is the healthcare industry obsession. It has to be, because it's so vast. Yep. But how has it driven better patient care? And I want to speak to the rest of our colleagues here about the tangible benefits that Anthony was touching on, the differentiation. So Jason, in terms of your world, public health, how has sustainability driven better outcomes?
In some ways, a little bit like what Bruno said, we're going to telehealth. That's been a big one for us. So now we're not bringing people in. They don't have to get in and drive. They can come and meet us here. They're connecting. We can connect many more people at one time without having to come here. Yeah. But also it's improving their lives, because a lot of the people that we serve, we're a safety net organization. And so we're reaching people that would have to, they'd struggle to get here. They'd have to either take a bus or do something like that. So it's improving their lives by doing more telehealth to get here. And in the US right now, a lot of our patients are undocumented and they're afraid to go to places. And so that's improving their experience. Now they can come and get that healthcare they need without being worried about something happening, someone there to try to get them or anything like that. So we're using that. So it's a little bit of sustainability added into a better way of serving our patients. Other things that we're doing with going to the cloud is the data that the patients have is more readily available to our other partners. And we really work with a university hospital here, and we're able to share a lot of that data because we share a lot of those patients. Whereas before it wasn't that easy being on-prem with everything siloed in our organization.
Thank you. And Anthony, and I'm very pleased you did raise this whole subject of differentiation. And have you got any great examples of how your technology, your solutions are actually providing tangible benefit?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Most of the customers that I meet, right, they ask a simple question: where do I start? Right? Where do I get the quick wins? Right? And they say, hey, they hire a lot of consulting firms, and they give them books and books of point of views in terms of ESG and sustainability, and they're lost where to start. For us, it's very simple. The low-hanging fruit is workload placement, right? So, for example, you can look at an app and just by looking at cost savings and efficiency in terms of workload placement, that in of itself gives you a lower carbon footprint. So what we do is part of the hybrid cloud strategy that we differentiated in the market is we look at workloads and see, hey, where can we optimize them, right? Is this workload better on a private cloud? And sometimes you're forced, right? Like Jason talked about regulated workloads, you're forced. And then you have other solutions on there, like a water cooling system, like Neema talked about, right? That you can use the water cooling system without using the power that's required to cool by going under the earth to cool the water, right? So there's some natural ways of cooling water. So there's some technologies that you can use there on the private cloud side. But on the public cloud side, as you look at cost savings, there's a lot of, all the hyperscalers are now providing a carbon footprint based on the infrastructure that you're going to use. So we have assessments right now that can optimize cost and carbon footprint based on workload. So that's the easiest place to start.
Thank you. And Neema, followed by Bruno. I'm interested in what you see within the companies who you work with about the tangible benefits and the sheer business sense of sustainability driven by using technology to its fullest extent. Neema, may I ask you to give us a perspective on that?
Sure. I'll give you two examples, but the first one was an interesting one, even for me as a human. So I was working for this Fortune 50 or 500 company, where they made this decision of letting go of indoor plants in the organization, in the building, right? And they said, we're going to save money. And for me, I was like, this is almost 10 years ago I'm talking about. And so it's like, is this really going to make a difference? Like taking out some of the indoor plants and throwing them out? Like, at that point, it didn't make sense to me. But what was interesting was, and then they got rid of all the plants. And I ended up going to this utility company that I spoke about. And out of curiosity, I just compared the two bills before the plants and after the plants for this company, And what was interesting was the company was saving $6 million year on year by increasing their thermostat temperature just by 1 degree or 2 degrees. That's how much difference you can make. So it's also cost saving for the company at the company level, right? Okay. But it's also kind of giving back to the environment as such, right? And the second one I want to point out is, we all talk about pretty much every company has this laptop refreshers and mobile refreshers. Now it's almost like cyclical, right? Like every 3 years you refresh your mobile, every 3 years you refresh your laptop. And no one really pays attention to how the laptop has been used and who's used it, for example. So one of the things I've taken up this time with, working for Oliver Wyman is actually looking into the persona of the laptop. What does that mean, right? Like, let's say I've used the laptop for like 3 years and I've just been a leader of the organization where I've not really done hard coding, for example, or not used for maybe design build or something. So the usage of that particular asset or is far lower compared to maybe when it's handled by a hardcore designer or a programmer, for example. So when you give these personas to these laptops, even at the small level, how much can you extend their life? So each asset should have a different lifespan, almost like human beings, right? Based on what they've done, what you've fed, what you've done. So I'm almost treating assets like a lifestyle of that particular asset and a life cycle for that asset, and seeing how much we can extend it by. So that's one of the new things that we have taken, and actually seeing where we can make that difference. And that's why, going back to my earlier comment of adding those small little actions to make that bigger impact, that is what is necessary. And also, like, if I were to go with the day-to-day operations, it's even somewhat of switching off the dev or test environment, or when it's off business hours, for example, or outside the business hours. Those are some of the things that you can do at a leader level, even, from big to small. Yeah.
Neema, you're speaking to a man who spent a lifetime smuggling in houseplants into all the offices he's worked in. So I'm very alarmed by the first use case you mentioned, but I buy the point you make. Bruno.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give some very brief examples for me that exemplify the breadth of possibilities once you kind of combine, I think, business intelligence with intelligent tech. I mean, one that, we find more and more these days, especially in these days, not just of rising power demand because of AI, but frankly, rising power scarcity and therefore increasing costs, is the concept of the virtual power plant, right? Usually what happens on the power grid is as power consumption, power demand increases, operators on the grid have to fire off additional assets to bring new power to the grid. And usually when you look at that stack, the higher up in the stack you go, usually the more carbon intensive that could be. You could have oil peakers at the top of your stack. And the virtual power plant is a concept that basically says, what if you have a bunch of enabled smart meters and smart devices in a bunch of parts of your grid and your network, and through the use of smart tech, instead of firing off something that's going to generate an extra, let's say, 500 megawatt hours of power for the next hour, you actually, dynamically, let's say, and you can enlist your, for example, utility customers in this. Hey, I'm going to turn off your or reduce the intensity of your HVAC system for the next 15 minutes. And if you do that across like 50,000 customers, all of a sudden you can bring hundreds of megawatt hours to the grid without actually having to fire off a new asset. You've basically created a virtual power plant. And so there's plenty of examples like that. Another one that I love is using kind of computing at the edge, right? Things like sensors in like things like smart agriculture, through both combining with real-time weather data, sensing weather patterns, you can actually optimize irrigation and reduce water consumption from agricultural use by 30-40%, which of course saves water, saves money. And oh, by the way, in many parts of the country, excessive irrigation usually leads to runoff that then creates all kinds of downstream issues with fertilizers and herbicides flowing into rivers, flowing into the Gulf of Mexico, et cetera. And so, those are just a few examples. And then the last one I'll just mention quickly is then like something we built, which is called the EY Decarbonization Workbench, but it's actually using a lot of our clients' data to help them develop all kinds of decarbonization scenarios. Because you've got, these days, thousands of companies that have set net zero goals, science-based targets, decarbonization goals, but have a hard time finding, so what do I actually need to go do? What will that cost? What will that, result in? And then what is the best way to marry that to the realities of my business and operational integrity and all of that? So using a lot of dynamic, and now we've built a whole AI decarb library into that tool that feeds it of, both public data and private data, to help clients find kind of optimized ways of decarbonizing their business very optimally.
I think we've touched on quite a few use cases and areas where the good application of technology can maybe have some transactional results, and that's cool. But how about the technology within your entire business processes? A much more difficult challenge, I'm thinking, Bruno, for a company to question the deployment of technology to change what it does, whether it's ERP systems, to actually transform its whole approach to its business rather than transactional wins.
Yeah, I mean, we a good example for us, if you want me to kick that off, a very large part of EY's business is where we audit many of the world's largest firms. It's a very data intensive, very people intensive process that requires an enormous amount of precision and ultimately, reliability and trust, because we're putting out basically formal opinions on things like audited financial statements and whatnot. So we've been actively incorporating, kind of next gen tech and a lot of AI enablement to our audit business. But to your point, you have to be really, really methodical, rigorous, intentional, deliberate, and ultimately, very inclusive in how you both deploy that, but how you test that, how you validate it, how you teach it to learn. And then how do you create kind of the right output so that you can measure, where it needs some additional tweaking. So, and same if you think of air traffic control or all kinds of NOCs and other places that have mission critical type of applications. They will absolutely benefit from the application of new technologies, but also need to be really, really careful as to how you deploy that so that you're not, there's some businesses where you can't go like, go fast and break things, right? Sometimes you have to go slow so that some important things don't break.
I mean, healthcare being one of them. I mean, and you and I both know that, Jason, from your current experience and a bit of my experience in my past. How are you using, or do you have plans to use technology to a transformational change within the processes of the organization? Do you see that?
Not really right now. I mean, we've done a lot of that in the past. We're going to collaborating, consolidating applications together into our ERP system. We had 14 different apps that we were putting into one ERP. So we've already done a lot of that. We've virtualized everything that we can. So we've already moved in that direction. I don't really see that, we've already moved to the cloud for our EHR. And so I don't see a whole lot right now that we're working on, but that's not to say that we'll come up with something.
Yeah, surely. Anthony, I did spot you nodding when I was asking the question. Either you were nodding off because the question was boring or you were agreeing with a hypothesis. But can you talk about that aspect of transformational change through business processes using deploying new technology?
Yeah, so Tim, the reason I was nodding is that was from a timing perspective in the market, right? We observed that especially around business processes, the biggest challenge that most customers have is not the tech stack. It's how can you use the tech stack and how can you modernize the business process, right? Yeah. And that's exactly why we worked with a customer. There's low-hanging use cases from especially citizen services in terms of government. So we worked with a government agency that's not in the US, but outside of US. And we co-created with them a framework called the Kyndryl AI Agentic Framework that targets modernizing the business processes using agentic AI, right? Basically, understanding the thing that you talked about, data, right? The business process, it's about business policies, data, right? All that, ingesting all that in a way that the agent and agentic AI can look at it and say, okay, how can they do it better, faster, more efficient, and impactful, right? So you can leverage AI that's going to consume more power to actually solve the problem of consuming more power by not only attacking the business processes, figuring out where the inefficiencies are in the business process, and not only that, creating a business process that is accelerated by that technology of agentic AI, right? And then not only the business processes, then how can you leverage that down into the infrastructure, down into the applications where you can use agentic AI to do the placement of workloads automatically based on the footprint, like Neema was talking about. Hey, how do you take down dev test workloads when they're not used? Use agentic AI to sense, hey, what the utilization is and switch it off, right? And so what we're seeing is like there's a lot of our projects that are around FinOps that are bursting out into sustainability. It has become a proxy, right? So you start off with FinOps and then you land on sustainability initiatives also while doing FinOps.
Neema, I'm still interested in this whole point of using technology to transform your business processes and from within, rather than just quick wins and low-hanging fruit.
Yeah. So the process, I think, starts with planning. In some ways, I tell people who tell me that, oh, we are so behind in our technology. The simple thing is, like, I think sometimes being behind is a blessing these days, especially with AI coming into play. One of the things that we are doing is also building the next gen platform. We call it the next gen platform. The reason for it is, how can we make our platform so nimble, so optimized for the future that we don't have to worry about legacy at some point, right? And then transferring all the legacy applications, for example, into this new next gen platform, right? Using agentic AIs and using AI, ML, everything, pretty much all the technology that is available today versus what was not available like 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, right? So if you look at, I like this example of Apple iPhone. Like when iPhone was launched, you didn't get a brochure. The reason for that, and everyone from rural India to cities in US used it very intuitively, freely, right? The reason for that is it was a very simple thing to use. So if you translate that idea into infrastructure or platform, how can we make this platform so simple that our folks can handle it at the click of a button? And how can it be so nimble and in some ways creative and artistic even, right? Not just looking at it as more another big legacy that we are creating for ourselves. So that's the thought process I would use. And optimization at every level. And if I were to take back to the healthcare example Jason was giving, like had the pleasure of working with a healthcare company, and we use smart glasses to reduce the error component in the packaging, right? And now you would think like 0.003% or something doesn't make a difference, but paying fees of fines for this packaging errors is a big thing, especially if it crosses international borders. Now, with smart glasses, you're reducing the error component by, let's say, 0.001% or whatever. That actually translates to 17 or 20 million per distribution center. Now, if you multiply that by 100 distribution or 500 distribution centers that you all have in bigger companies, it's a lot of money. Plus, you're making it so much more sustainable in the long run for the company, the community, and overall environment. And I think so. The governance should be at the org level, but also at the global level, right? And the reason I say org level, we would get and individual levels also sometimes. If I were to give you an example of the same, DC example, we used to get requests for white glove service, packaging in white covers only, if it was meant for some celebrity or something like that. Now, why do you have to have two differentiated ways of packaging something, one for commoners, one for celebrity? If that makes sense, right? So we are responsible at the individual level and also at company level, right? Like if every organization says, okay, we are not going to differentiate, we're responsible for our environment, and then packages in that reusable format or recyclable format, you're adding to that sustainability goal. So it's at the broader level as well as a smaller tactical level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was asking my very good friend Gemini 2.5 at the moment about this, and of course one of the things it came up with, and it's so absolutely germane, is the use of AI in particular and other technologies to work on your supply chain. In hundreds of conversations I've had with business leaders about sustainability and technology, the visibility of their supply chain and the ability to influence their supply chain to deliver your scope 3 is impossible. No one says they've got it right. Do you see that nut ever being cracked? I mean, Neema, may I stay with you to answer that one first.
I don't think. I think Bruno or Jason, or Anthony, one of them mentioned being intentional, right? I think that is the key to everything. You can always achieve results when you're intentional about something. So what is the appetite to make it nimble, more optimized, or have it in a structured or a different way? So it starts from there. I think as long as anyone has an appetite to do it, you will end up achieving those results. So it is.
But it hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't happened because there's no intention to do it. So it needs to happen at the community level. It needs to happen at the org level and at the individual level. Like it starts with the CEO of the company. It starts with the organization, or even at the country level, right, or continent level, whatever you want to call it. But it needs to be intentional.
Yeah. Okay. So it's got to be leadership led. But Bruno, do you see technology solving that problem with the visibility and the influencing of your supply chain to improve your scope 3?
For sure. I mean, scope 3 is in itself a huge
it's a whole different thing.
Box of questions, but no, for sure. I mean, I think for most organizations, a lot of their sustainability challenges are in fact in their supply chain, and they sit on multiple layers. For example, we have also deployed AI enablement to we have both a climate risk assessment platform as well as a nature risk assessment platform. So for example, for many organizations, they need to understand where they might have specific commodity related risk, or sub-geography related risk, if they have operations that sit in flood zones or extreme weather paths where they could experience supply chain reduction, disruption, or even forced migration. So you have the whole, how do you both identify and then manage those risks? You have, of course, then the whole kind of data challenge, which scope 3 often is where do I have, even in the basic things of greenhouse gas emissions, right? Where do I have processes in my supply chain that emit, and in what quantities? And in some cases, part of our advice is don't necessarily chase precision out of the gate. I think that goes back to Neema's point a little bit. Is in some cases a good compass will get you a long way before you need GPS level precision, right? If where you do basic hotspot analysis, you understand where the carbon intensity is in your supply chain. What are the alternatives to that carbon intensity? Do you need to switch to an alternative material? Can you decarbonize the material you have? Can you actually do some reverse logistics around, for example, you see some of the tech manufacturers having sourced more, for example, recycled metals as opposed to going all the way to virgin metals for their products. That dramatically reduces all of the upstream risk all the way to the mine, and that could be both political risk, currency risk, human rights risks, all kinds of things. So you see the use of technology to really understand, where are those hotspots, what are the alternative pathways, and then what are the mitigation tactics that you can use to then, actually harden your supply chain. We saw a lot of that through the COVID years, right? Of how tightly wound supply chains can be sometimes stretch a little bit too tight. And sometimes sustainability and resiliency are at odds. Sometimes you want a lot of redundancy, which of course doesn't necessarily drive the most efficiency, but in a world where you're also balancing mitigating and adapting to different environmental and sustainability risks. There's a lot there. So has anybody solved this yet, Tim? No, for sure. But I think there's plenty. I would maybe say, Neema, I think there is a lot of intention. You know, we work a lot with clients and especially chief procurement officers who understand the challenge and who are definitely on a journey to address that. But nobody's crossed the finish line there. That's for sure.
No, that's for sure. Anthony, do you see the technology is cracking that one soon?
I think there's a lot of promise I'll go back to agentic AI. Why? Yeah. Because scope 3 is too complex. There's so many moving parts in the supply chain. And how do you get to a place where there is that sense and respond without prompts, right? So across the supply chain. And I think that's an amazing use case to solve using agentic AI, right? So, and then there is a confluence of other technologies, especially if you're in the food industry and our retail industry, where you can use blockchain for the integrity. You can use there has to be all these piece parts that also feeds the agentic AI tech to solve it. I think there's a lot of promise in agentic AI to solve that complex problem of scope 3, because 70 to 90% of carbon emissions are across that supply chain. Right? So even if I can take a 10-15% dent, that's amazing.
Jason, if there was ever a sector that has a vast and complex supply chain one way or the other, that's health. How are you using technology to manage that supply chain and try and control it too, in terms of sustainability, for one thing?
We haven't done enough, I can tell you that. That's something that we've really started looking at more and more. When we do our contracts, a lot of it's in our contracting process, learning about the sustainability and putting that into play, and asking what our suppliers are doing for sustainability. I don't think we'll ever get that full visibility. I mean, people are going to hide stuff. They're going to keep it as secret as possible, just until they're forced to. You know, I think going back to the questions we've been talking about here, a lot of the stuff we've been doing with sustainability has all been about the carrot out there, getting people to do it because they want to, and there hasn't really been the stick aspect of it, of making them do it yet. And I think that's coming a little bit more. And until there are more consequences, I think that some of that visibility won't be seen. But I really like what Anthony was saying, with agentic AI, with AI in general too, that visibility is going to start opening up. The data is going to get out of what suppliers are more sustainable and what ones are doing it better. And that's going to help us to make those decisions, across the board. We'll get more visibility through interactions and through other people learning about it. So like I said, it's something that we've just now started really doing in our contractual applications and working with those providers. When it comes to other aspects that we're doing, we're talking about how do they do their e-waste and all that, because that's a big one that we have in the tech world, is understanding what they do with that, who they're working with. And we've actually worked with some suppliers that didn't have anyone, and we turned them on to one of our providers for e-waste that was able to work with them. So I think it's an informational sharing time too, because this is new for a lot of people. And if we're open and asking about it, it opens up their eyes that we need to start thinking about this.
Do you know what, Jason? I think in reality, you speak for most businesses in what you've just said. We've had a comment come through on the question panel that we have, and it simply says, look, thank you for including this topic. I find that people shy away from sustainability discussions, and it's so crucial as we move forward with more AI advancements, which I think is completely true, and a great comment with which to wrap up this technology forum. There's so much stuff that I was supposed to have covered, and we haven't got anywhere near, but it's been the most brilliant discussion. So Bruno, Neema, Jason and Anthony, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's been insightful and interesting. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.